In the idyllic village of St. Mary Mead, a rare marble statue, the Weeping Muse, vanishes from a grand garden exhibition, sending shockwaves through the quiet community. Was it the nervous curator, hiding debts behind his meticulous facade? The reclusive sculptor, whose pride masks a deeper secret? The flamboyant guest, with her mysterious gifts and late-night wanderings? Or the charming collector, whose obsession with rare art knows no bounds? Enter Miss Jane Marple, a sharp-eyed spinster whose gentle questions unravel a web of clues: green paint, waxy grass, tire tracks, leading to a cunning thief. In just 30 seconds, step into a classic Agatha Christie mystery, where nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies hidden in the heart of a peaceful village. Chapter 1. The Garden Exhibition. The late August sun bathed the manicured lawns of Ashbourne Hall in a golden glow, transforming the estate into a vision of pastoral splendour. Lady Ashbourne, a widow of considerable charm and wealth, had opened her gardens for the annual St. Mary Mead exhibition, an event that drew villagers and outsiders alike. Roses bloomed in riotous colour, fountains sparkled, and at the heart of it all stood the exhibition's crowning glory. The Weeping Muse, a rare marble statue of such exquisite craftsmanship that it seemed to breathe with melancholy life. Its creator, Mr. Felix Varnum, was a sculptor of elusive reputation, and the statue's delicate features, a woman with downcast eyes, her hands clasped in silent grief, had already sparked murmurs of awe among the crowd. Miss Jane Marple, a guest of Lady Ashbourne and a resident of the village, sat unobtrusively on a wrought-iron bench beneath a willow tree. Her knitting needles moved with rhythmic precision, the soft clink of metal blending with the hum of conversation. She wore a simple tweed skirt and a lavender cardigan, her white hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster enjoying the afternoon, but her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. She noted the way Mr. Percival Wren, the curator, hovered near the statue's pedestal, adjusting its velvet rope with a fussiness that bordered on obsession. His thin frame and pinched expression suggested a man burdened by responsibility, or perhaps something more. Across the lawn, Mrs. Clara Henshaw, a vivacious widow and guest from London, paused to admire the statue. Her silk dress shimmered in the sunlight, and her laughter carried over the crowd as she spoke to a group of admirers. "Isn't it divine?" she exclaimed, her gloved hand gesturing toward the Weeping Muse. Miss Marple observed the faintest trace of calculation in her enthusiasm, as though Mrs. Henshaw were performing for an unseen audience. Nearby, a tall man in a tailored suit lingered, his gaze fixed on the statue with an intensity that set him apart. This was Mr. Roland Baxter, a collector whose name was whispered in art circles with equal parts admiration and suspicion. His polished demeanour and easy smile did little to mask the hunger in his eyes. Miss Marple's attention shifted to a conversation nearby. "Varnum's a genius, but odd," a local gardener muttered to his companion. "Keeps to himself, barely speaks. You'd think he'd be prouder of that statue." Miss Marple tilted her head, filing the remark away. She had met Mr. Varnum once, years ago, and recalled his brusque manner and calloused hands that could coax beauty from stone but seemed ill at ease with human company. He was absent today, though his creation drew every eye. Lady Ashbourne approached, her face alight with pride. "Jane, dear, what do you think of our little show? she asked, settling beside Miss Marple. "The statue is quite the triumph, isn't it?" "Quite remarkable," Miss Marple replied, her voice gentle but her mind alert. "It's rare to see such craftsmanship, and such attention it's drawing." She glanced toward Mr. Baxter, who had moved closer to the statue, his fingers brushing the air as if imagining possession. "Yes, Mr. Wren's done wonders organising it all," Lady Ashburn continued, "though he's been rather nervy lately. And that Mr. Baxter, such a charming man, but so intense about art. He offered to buy the statue outright, you know, but Felix refused to sell." Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing briefly. "And Mrs. Henshaw seems quite taken with it too," she remarked, watching the widow laugh with a young man who seemed dazzled by her charm. "Oh, Clara's always been theatrical," Lady Ashburn said with a fond smile. "But she's harmless. Now do come for tea later, Jane. I want to hear all your village gossip." As Lady Ashburn moved off to greet other guests, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her eyes drifting over the scene. The crowd ebbed and flowed, but the statue remained the focal point. Its silent sorrow a magnet for admiration, and perhaps something darker. She noted the way Mr. Wren glanced furtively at his watch, as if expecting something. Mrs. Henshaw's laughter rang out again, but it seemed to falter when she caught Mr. Baxter's stare. And Mr. Baxter himself lingered too long, his polished exterior unable to conceal a certain restlessness. The afternoon wore on, and as shadows lengthened across the lawn, Miss Marple felt a faint prickle of unease. St. Mary Mead was a quiet place, but she knew better than most that even the quietest places harboured secrets. She tucked her knitting into her bag and rose, her mind already sifting through the threads of what she had seen. The weeping Muse stood serene under the fading light, unaware that its fate would soon unsettle the village, and draw Miss Marple into a mystery as delicate and intricate as the statue itself. Chapter 2. The Disappearance. The morning of the second day at Ashburn Hall dawned with a mist that clung to the gardens like a delicate veil, softening the edges of the rose beds and lending an ethereal quality to the sprawling lawns. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and late summer blooms. Miss Jane Marple, ever an early riser, had taken her customary walk through the village before arriving at the estate, her sturdy shoes leaving faint imprints on the dewy grass. She had intended to spend a quiet hour sketching the layout of the exhibition grounds in her small notebook, a habit born of years observing the subtle patterns of human behaviour. But the tranquillity was shattered before she could settle on her favourite bench. A piercing cry cut through the mist, sharp and urgent, emanating from the heart of the garden where the weeping Muse had stood in silent splendour. Miss Marple's head turned, her knitting bag still slung over her arm, as she quickened her pace toward the sound. A small crowd had already gathered near the statue's pedestal, their murmurs rising like the hum of disturbed bees. Lady Ashbourne, her face pale beneath her wide-brimmed hat, stood wringing her hands, while Mr. Percival Wren, the curator, gesticulated wildly to a young groundskeeper. The pedestal, so proudly adorned the previous day, was starkly empty. The statue was gone. Miss Marple approached, her calm demeanour a stark contrast to the growing agitation around her. She noted the scuff mark in the grass beside the pedestal, a faint smear where the dew had been disturbed, as though something heavy had been shifted with care. The mark was not deep, suggesting no dragging had occurred, but its presence was a silent accusation against the morning's stillness. She bent slightly, her eyes tracing the ground, and saw a few blades of grass bent unnaturally, their tips pointing towards the estate's rear gate. "What's happened?" she asked softly, addressing Lady Ashbourne, who turned to her with a look of near despair. "It's gone, Jane!" Lady Ashbourne exclaimed, her voice trembling. "The Weeping Muse, stolen in the night! Who could do such a thing? It's priceless, irreplaceable!" Mr. Wren, overhearing, spun toward them, his thin face flushed with a mixture of panic and indignation. "I locked the gates myself, Lady Ashbourne. I swear it. At 9 o'clock last night, I checked the statue, and it was secure. The padlocks were intact, the grounds deserted. This is sabotage. Someone must have had a key." Miss Marple's eyes flickered to Mr. Wren's hands, which clutched a handkerchief he used to mop his brow. His agitation seemed genuine, but she noted the slight tremor in his fingers, the way his gaze darted toward the crowd rather than meeting her own. "And you saw no one lingering after hours?" she asked, her tone mild but probing. "No one," Mr. Wren insisted. "I patrolled the perimeter myself. The exhibition was closed, the guests gone. Only the staff remained, and they were in the servants' quarters by 10. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, though her mind was already cataloguing the details. The statue, weighing nearly 200 pounds, could not have been moved easily. It would have required strength, planning, and perhaps more than one pair of hands. She glanced at the crowd, where Mrs. Clara Henshaw stood, her silk scarf fluttering as she whispered to a companion. Her face was a mask of concern, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance toward the rear gate, as if Mrs. Henshaw were measuring its distance. Nearby, Mr. Roland Baxter stood apart, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable, save for a faint tightening of his jaw. Mr. Felix Varnum, the sculptor, was conspicuously absent. The local constable, Mr. Hargreaves, arrived shortly after, his bicycle wobbling as he dismounted. He was a sturdy man with a ruddy complexion, more accustomed to settling disputes over stray livestock than investigating thefts of fine art. He scratched his head, peering at the empty pedestal with a mixture of confusion and dismay. "Never seen anything like it," he muttered. "No broken locks, no signs of a struggle. It's as if the thing vanished into thin air." Miss Marple, standing quietly to one side, did not share the constable's bewilderment. She had seen too many vanishings in her time to believe in the supernatural. Instead, she turned her attention to the ground again, noting a faint indentation near the scuff mark, as though a tool or a crate had been set down briefly. She also observed a few stray pebbles displaced, their arrangement suggesting a hurried movement toward the rear of the garden, where a narrow path led to a service gate rarely used by guests. "Constable," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "might it be wise to examine the service gate? It's less visible from the house, and the grass there might hold more clues." Mr. Hargreaves blinked, then nodded, grateful for direction. "Right you are, Miss Marple. I'll have a look." He trudged off, followed by a young groundskeeper who seemed eager to escape the crowd's scrutiny. Lady Ashbourne, regaining some composure, turned to Miss Marple. "Jane, you've a knack for these things. Will you help us? I can't bear the thought of that beautiful statue lost forever." "Of course, my dear," Miss Marple replied, patting her friend's hand. "I'll do what I can, but we must be methodical. Tell me, who had access to the garden after hours?" Lady Ashbourne frowned, thinking, "Only Mr. Wren, really. He oversees the grounds and has the keys. The staff have their own duties, but they don't linger in the exhibition area. Oh, and Mr. Varnum was here yesterday, though he left early. He's such a solitary man, I doubt he'd involve himself in this." "And the guests?" Miss Marple pressed, her eyes drifting to Mrs. Henshaw, who was now speaking animatedly to a group of villagers. "Well, Mrs. Henshaw stayed late, admiring the displays. She's quite taken with art, you know. And Mr. Baxter was here until dusk, I believe. He's been so keen on the statue, asking all sorts of questions about its history." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the possibilities. Mrs. Henshaw's late-night wanderings were curious, especially given her theatrical demeanour. Mr. Baxter's interest, meanwhile, bordered on obsession, and his wealth gave him the means to orchestrate a theft. Mr. Wren's insistence on his innocence was plausible, but his nervous manner suggested something unspoken. And Mr. Varnum's absence was itself a question mark. Why would the statue's creator show so little concern for its fate? As the crowd dispersed, Miss Marple lingered near the pedestal, her eyes scanning the surrounding area. She noticed a faint smudge on the pedestal's base, barely visible against the polished stone. It was not dirt, but a trace of something waxy, perhaps from a glove or a tool. She made a mental note to inquire about the groundskeeper's equipment. She also spotted a single petal, crushed and out of place, from a rare orchid that grew only near the rear gate. It was a small detail, but Miss Marple knew that small details often unravelled the tightest knots. She walked slowly toward the service gate, where Constable Hargreaves was examining the lock. It was undamaged, its heavy padlock gleaming as if newly polished. "No signs of tampering," he reported, shaking his head. "Whoever did this knew what they were about." "Indeed," Miss Marple murmured, her gaze falling to the path beyond the gate. It led to a narrow lane, bordered by hedgerows, a route used by delivery vans and tradesmen. She noticed tyre tracks in the soft earth, faint but recent, their tread suggesting a vehicle heavier than the usual grocer's cart. "Constable, might you ask the villagers if any unfamiliar vehicles were seen last night? A van, perhaps, or a lorry?" Hargreaves nodded, jotting the suggestion in his notebook. "Good thinking, Miss Marple. I'll send my lad to inquire in the village." As the constable moved off, Miss Marple returned to the garden, her mind weaving a tapestry of possibilities. The statue's weight ruled out a spontaneous theft. This was a planned act, requiring access, knowledge, and nerve. Mr. Wren's keys made him an obvious suspect, but his agitation seemed more like fear than guilt. Mrs. Henshaw's presence in the gardens after hours was suspicious, yet her flamboyant nature suggested she craved attention, not secrecy. Mr. Baxter's quiet intensity was more troubling, his polished exterior masking a collector's greed. And Mr. Varnum, absent yet connected to the statue's very essence, could not be dismissed. Miss Marple paused by a fountain, its gentle splash a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. She recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a silver teapot vanished from the vicarage. The thief had been a trusted parishioner. Driven by a hidden debt, the memory sharpened her focus, Motives, she knew, were rarely as simple as they seemed. Greed, pride, desperation, or even spite could lie at the heart of this theft. She resolved to speak with each suspect, to probe their stories with the gentle persistence that had unravelled so many mysteries before. As the mist began to lift, revealing the full splendour of Ashbourne Hall's gardens, Miss Marple felt of a familiar stirring. The disappearance of the Weeping Muse was no mere theft. It was a challenge, a puzzle laid out in the grass and stone of this quiet village. She adjusted her hat, her lips curving in a faint smile. The game, as her old friend Sir Henry Clithering might say, was afoot, and Miss Marple, with her keen eyes and unassuming air, was ready to play it. Chapter 3. The Curator's Defence. The late morning sun had burned away the mist, leaving Ashbourne Hall's gardens bathed in a crisp, golden light. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room of the manor, a delicate porcelain teacup balanced in her hands, the faint aroma of Darjeeling mingling with the polish of old oak. Across from her, Mr. Percival Wren perched on the edge of a velvet-upholstered chair, his fingers twisting a crumpled handkerchief, as if it were an anchor to his fraying composure. Lady Ashbourne had graciously offered the room for Miss Marple's inquiries, trusting her old friend's quiet knack for uncovering truths. The theft of the Weeping Muse had left the household in disarray, and Mr. Wren, as curator, was the natural starting point for Miss Marple's gentle but incisive probing. The drawing-room, with its high ceilings and heavy drapes, felt like a stage for confession, though Mr. Wren seemed more inclined to protest than confide. His narrow face, framed by wire-rimmed spectacles, was drawn with anxiety, and his grey suit, though neatly pressed, bore a faint stain of ink on one cuff, a detail Miss Marple noted as she sipped her tea. "Mr. Wren," she began, her voice soft and unassuming, "you must be dreadfully shaken by this theft. Such a responsibility, overseeing so valuable a piece." "Shaken? I'm positively undone, Miss Marple." Mr. Wren's voice cracked, and he dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief. "The statue was my charge. I've overseen every detail of this exhibition, every flower bed, every plaque, every lock. To think someone could breach my arrangements, it's unthinkable." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her knitting needles resting in her lap, though her eyes were sharp as they studied him. "You mentioned locking the gates yourself last night. Could you walk me through your routine? It might help to pinpoint where things went awry." Mr. Wren hesitated, his gaze flickering to the window as if seeking escape in the garden beyond. "Of course," he said, clearing his throat. "After the guests left at 8, I made my rounds. The main gate, the side entrance, the service gate, all were secure. I checked the Weeping Muse at 9, as I told Lady Ashbourne. The statue stood exactly as it should, its ropes undisturbed. I locked the main gate last, using the heavy padlock, and kept the key in my pocket. Then I retired to my quarters in the east wing." "And you saw no one lingering?" Miss Marple asked, her tone as mild as if she were discussing the weather. "No one," Mr. Wren said firmly, though his fingers tightened on the handkerchief. The grounds were empty. The staff were in their quarters, and the guests had gone. I'd have noticed anything amiss. I'm particular about such things." Miss Marple's smile was encouraging, but her mind was sifting through his words. Particular, yes, but perhaps too insistent on his diligence. She recalled the scuff mark by the pedestal, the undisturbed lock on the service gate, and the faint tyre tracks beyond it. A key in Mr. Wren's possession would explain much, but his agitation suggested fear rather than cunning. "And this key," she said, tilting her head, "you keep it always with you?" "Always." Mr. Wren patted his waistcoat pocket, then froze, his hand lingering as if struck by a sudden doubt. "That is, I did last night. It's here now, of course." He produced a heavy brass key, its surface gleaming, and held it up as if it were proof of his innocence. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her eyes catching the key's pristine condition. "How curious," she murmured, almost to herself. "It looks quite new. No scratches, no wear, almost as if it were freshly made." Mr. Wren flushed, tucking the key away hastily. "I take care of my things, Miss Marple. A curator must be meticulous." "Of course," she replied, her tone soothing. She made a mental note of the key's appearance, recalling a conversation in the village tea shop about Mr. Wren's recent purchase of a new lock. Had he replaced an old one, or had he acquired a duplicate for another purpose? She shifted the subject, her voice as gentle as ever. "You must know this statue's value better than most. Have there been any inquiries about it? Offers, perhaps, that might have tempted someone?" Mr. Wren's eyes widened, and he shook his head vigorously. "Oh, no, nothing like that. Well, Mr. Baxter did express interest. He's a collector, you know. But Mr. Varnum refused to sell. The statue's worth a fortune, but it's not about money to him. It's art, pure and simple." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to Mr. Roland Baxter's intense gaze at the exhibition. A collector's passion could easily tip into obsession, but Mr. Wren's quick mention of him felt rehearsed, as if deflecting attention. She set her teacup down, her movements deliberate. "And your own circumstances, Mr. Wren. Managing such an event must be costly. No, financial pressures, I hope." The question was asked with such kindness that it took Mr. Wren a moment to register its edge. His face reddened, and he stammered, I manage well enough, Miss Marple. My salary is modest, but Lady Ashbourne is generous. I've no need to do anything untoward." Miss Marple's smile remained serene, but she noted the hitch in his voice, the way his eyes darted to the floor. She had heard whispers in the village of Mr. Wren's recent visit to a bank in the neighbouring town, where he'd been turned away empty-handed. A man with debts might be desperate, and desperation could lead to rash acts, even theft. Yet his nervousness seemed to stem from fear of blame rather than guilt. Or was it both? She rose, smoothing her skirt. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Wren. I'm sure the constable will appreciate your thoroughness. One last thing. Did you notice anything unusual last night? A sound, perhaps, or a light in the garden?" Mr. Wren hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Well, now that you mention it, I did hear a faint noise around midnight, like a cart or a wheel creaking, but I thought it was the wind. My room overlooks the east garden, you see, and I was half asleep." Miss Marple's eyes brightened imperceptibly. A creaking wheel could align with the tyre tracks she'd seen, or perhaps the groundskeeper's mention of a delivery van. "Thank you, Mr. Wren," she said warmly. "You've given me much to think about." As Mr. Wren stood, visibly relieved to end the conversation, Miss Marple lingered by the window, her gaze drifting to the garden. The empty pedestal stood like a silent accusation, its ropes dangling forlornly. She recalled the waxy smudge on the pedestal's base, the crushed orchid petal near the service gate, and now Mr. Wren's mention of a midnight noise. The pieces were scattered, but Miss Marple had a knack for fitting them together, like the patches of a quilt she'd once helped her niece sew. She thanked Lady Ashburn for the tea and stepped into the garden, her mind alive with possibilities. Mr. Wren's story held water, but there were cracks. His new key, his evasive glance, his financial straits. He had opportunity, but did he have motive? And what of the others? Mrs. Henshaw's late-night wanderings, Mr. Baxter's acquisitive stare, Mr. Varnum's absence, all were threads in a tapestry yet to be woven. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her lips curving faintly. The curator had defended himself, but in doing so, he had opened a door to further questions, and Miss Marple was never one to leave a door unopened. Chapter 4. The Sculptor's Solitude. The narrow lane to Mr. Felix Varnum's cottage wound through a copse of ancient yews, their gnarled branches casting dappled shadows on the gravel path. Miss Jane Marple walked with her usual measured step, her knitting bag swinging lightly at her side, though her eyes were alert, taking in the quiet isolation of the sculptor's retreat. The air held a chill, despite the midday sun, and the distant hum of St. Mary Mead's daily life seemed to fade with each step. The cottage itself was a low stone building, its roof sagging under a weight of moss, its windows half hidden by ivy. It was a place that seemed to shun company, much like its occupant. Miss Marple had chosen to visit Mr. Varnum next, intrigued by his absence from the exhibition's second day, and the murmurs about his indifference to the Weeping Muse's fate. A man who could craft such a statue, with its hauntingly lifelike sorrow, must have a connection to it. Yet his detachment puzzled her. She knocked gently on the weathered door, her knuckles barely making a sound against the thick oak. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Mr. Varnum's tall, angular frame. His face was lined, his dark hair streaked with grey, and his eyes, deep-set and guarded, regarded her with a mix of curiosity and impatience. "Miss Marple, is it?" he said, his voice low and gravelly, as if seldom used. "Lady Ashbourne mentioned you might call. Something about the statue, I suppose." "Indeed, Mr. Varnum," Miss Marple replied, her tone as warm as a summer afternoon. "I hope I'm not intruding. I was so struck by the Weeping Muse at the exhibition, and now, with its disappearance, I thought you might share some insight." He stepped aside, gesturing her into the cottage with a reluctant nod. The interior was a chaos of creation. Stone dust coated every surface, chisels and mallets lay scattered on a workbench, and half-finished sculptures loomed like silent sentinels in the dim light. A single chair by a cold hearth offered the only concession to comfort. Miss Marple settled into it, her knitting bag resting on her lap, while Mr. Varnum leaned against the workbench, his arms crossed. "I don't know what I can tell you," he said brusquely. "It's gone. Stolen, they say. Doesn't much matter to me. It's just stone, after all." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly, though her smile remained gentle. "Just stone? But such stone, Mr. Varnum. The way you shaped it, it seemed almost alive. Surely you feel some attachment to your work." He shrugged, his fingers twitching as if itching for a chisel. "It's done. It's out there. People fuss over it, but I've moved on. Plenty more where that came from." His tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of something. Pride, perhaps, or pain in his eyes. She glanced around the room, noting a fresh bandage wrapped around his left hand, the edges frayed and smudged with dust. "An injury, Mr. Varnum?" she asked, her voice all concern. "I do hope it's not serious." He tucked the hand behind his back, his scowl deepening. "Caught it on a chisel yesterday. Clumsy of me. It's nothing." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to a wheelbarrow parked just outside the open door. Its wheel was caked with dark, damp soil, strikingly similar to the earth near the exhibition service gate. A coil of rope lay beside it, its ends frayed as if recently used. "You keep busy, out here," she remarked, her tone light. "Do you often work late? The night of the theft, perhaps?" Varnum's eyes narrowed, but he answered readily enough. "I was here, carving. Didn't leave the cottage. Why would I? The exhibition's not my affair. Wren handles all that nonsense." "And you heard nothing unusual? No sounds from the lane? No vehicles?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she drew her knitting from her bag, the motion soothing, but her gaze sharp. "Nothing," he said flatly. "This place is quiet. Suits me. If there was a theft, it's Wren's problem, not mine." Miss Marple's smile was disarming, but her mind was racing. His solitude was believable. Varnum was known for shunning society, but his indifference felt forced. The bandage, the wheelbarrow, the rope, each was a small thread, but together they suggested a pattern. She recalled the scuff mark by the pedestal, the tire tracks beyond the gate, and Mr. Wren's mention of a creaking wheel. Could Varnum have ventured out, perhaps to reclaim his creation for reasons of his own? Pride, resentment, or even a desire to protect his work from unworthy hands? She shifted the conversation, her voice as gentle as ever. "I understand Mr. Baxter made an offer for the statue. Quite a generous one, I hear. Did he approach you directly?" Varnum's lip curled. "He tried. Sent me a letter full of flattery and figures. I didn't bother replying. My work's not for sale to men like him, collectors who lock art away in private vaults. The Weeping Muse was meant to be seen, not hoarded." Miss Marple nodded, noting the sudden passion in his voice. Here was a man who cared more than he admitted, whose gruff exterior hid a fierce devotion to his craft. But devotion could twist into obsession, and obsession into action. "It's a pity," she said, "that such a work should vanish. Do you think it could be recovered?" He shrugged again, but his eyes lingered on her, as if weighing her intent. "Thieves are clever, Miss Marple. If they took it, they've planned well. But stone's heavy, hard to hide forever." She rose, smoothing her skirt. "You're quite right, Mr. Varnum. Nothing stays hidden forever." Her tone was kind, but her words carried a quiet weight. She thanked him for his time and stepped outside, pausing to glance at the wheelbarrow. A single blade of grass, caught in the soil on its wheel, matched the type she'd seen near the pedestal. It was a tiny detail, but Miss Marple had built solutions on less. As she walked back to the village, the sun now high and warm, her thoughts turned over the encounter. Varnum's solitude was no alibi. It was a shield, one that could hide guilt or merely indifference. His injury, his tools, his dismissive attitude, all were pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit neatly. She thought of a gardener she'd known in St. Mary Mead, a man who'd stolen bulbs from a rival's plot out of jealousy. Varnum's motives were unclear, but his connection to the statue made him a thread she could not yet cut. The lane opened onto the village green, where children played and shopkeepers swept their steps. Miss Marple's steps slowed, her mind weaving the morning's clues into a delicate web. The waxy smudge, the orchid petal, the tire tracks, and now the wheelbarrow's soil, all pointed to a careful plan, executed under cover of night. Varnum's solitude made him a loner, but not necessarily innocent. She resolved to speak with Mrs. Henshaw next, curious about the widow's late-night wanderings and the gleam in her eyes when she'd admired the statue. For now, Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her lips curving faintly. The sculptor's solitude was a fortress, but even fortresses had cracks. Chapter 5. The Guest's Tale. The village inn at St. Mary Mead, with its low-beamed ceilings and polished brass fixtures, hummed with the quiet bustle of midday. The scent of freshly baked scones mingled with the tang of ale, and a fire crackled in the hearth despite the lingering warmth of late summer. Miss Jane Marple sat at a corner table, her knitting bag tucked beside her, a pot of tea steaming gently before her. She had arranged to meet Mrs. Clara Henshaw here, choosing the inn's public yet intimate setting to put the vivacious widow at ease. Mrs. Henshaw's late-night presence in the garden on the evening of the theft had piqued Miss Marple's curiosity, and her theatrical demeanour at the exhibition suggested a woman who thrived on attention, perhaps too much so. Mrs. Henshaw arrived promptly, her silk dress rustling as she swept into the room, drawing every eye with her bright smile, and the gleam of a sapphire brooch pinned to her collar. She was a woman of middle years, her auburn hair artfully arranged, her movements graceful yet calculated, as if she were always performing. "Miss Marple!" she exclaimed, settling into the chair opposite with a flourish. "What a delight to meet like this, though I confess I'm all aflutter about this dreadful business with the statue. To think someone could steal such a treasure." Miss Marple poured tea, her movements deliberate, her smile warm, but her eyes keen. "It is dreadful, Mrs. Henshaw. I understand you were quite taken with the Weeping Muse. You were seen admiring it late on the first evening. It must have been quite a sight in the moonlight." Mrs. Henshaw's laughter was light, almost musical, but Miss Marple noted a fleeting tightness in her expression. "Oh, I couldn't resist a last look. The exhibition was so enchanting, and that statue, well, it seemed to glow, you know, with that strange, sorrowful beauty. I slipped back after dinner, just to soak it in. I hope I didn't break any rules." "Not at all," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "The gardens are meant to be enjoyed, but it must have been quite late. Did you see anyone else? Mr. Wren, perhaps, on his rounds, or another guest?" Mrs. Henshaw sipped her tea, her eyes widening with an air of innocence that seemed almost too perfect. "No one, I'm afraid. The place was deserted, save for me and the stars. I wandered a bit, then returned to my room at the manor. I couldn't sleep, you see. Too much excitement." She laughed again, but Miss Marple caught a slight tremor in her hand as she set the cup down. "And you noticed nothing unusual?" Miss Marple pressed gently, her needles clicking softly as she drew her knitting from her bag. "No sounds, no lights. The statue was still there, I presume?" "Oh, yes, it was there all right," Mrs. Henshaw said quickly. "Standing just as it should, with those velvet ropes around it. I didn't hear a thing, well, perhaps a rustle in the bushes, but I thought it was a rabbit or some such. The country's full of little noises, isn't it?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind latching onto the mention of a rustle. It could indeed have been a rabbit, but it might also have been a footstep, or the shift of a heavy load. She studied Mrs. Henshaw's brooch, its sapphires catching the firelight. "That's a lovely piece," she remarked, her voice casual. "A recent acquisition, I take it?" Mrs. Henshaw's fingers brushed the brooch, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Oh, this? A gift from a dear friend in London. Quite unexpected, really. I've taken to wearing it everywhere. It's rather grand, don't you think?" "Very grand," Miss Marple agreed, her eyes lingering on the brooch. She had heard whispers in the village of Mrs. Henshaw's penchant for expensive trinkets, often funded by admirers, whose names she kept vague. A gift or a payment? The thought lingered as Miss Marple shifted the conversation. "You must know many people in the art world, Mrs. Henshaw. Have you ever come across Mr. Baxter, the collector? He seemed quite taken with the statue as well." Mrs. Henshaw's eyes flickered, and she leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Oh, Mr. Baxter, such a charming man, but a bit intense, don't you think? He was talking about the Weeping Muse non-stop at the exhibition, going on about its rarity, its value. I heard him say he'd give anything to have it in his collection. Rather bold, if you ask me." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind noting the eagerness with which Mrs. Henshaw pointed to Mr. Baxter. It was a deft deflection, but too swift to be entirely natural. "Indeed," she said, "and Mr. Varnum, the sculptor? Did you speak with him at all?" "Only in passing," Mrs. Henshaw replied, waving a hand. "He's such a dour sort, isn't he?" Hardly said a word, just glowered at everyone fawning over his work. "I don't think he cares for society much." Miss Marple smiled, recalling Mr. Varnum's gruff manner and the soil-caked wheelbarrow outside his cottage. Mrs. Henshaw's observation was accurate, but her quick dismissal of the sculptor felt calculated, as if she wished to steer attention elsewhere. "And Mr. Wren?" Miss Marple asked. "He must have been busy, keeping everything in order. Did you see him that night?" Mrs. Henshaw hesitated, her fingers toying with the brooch. Well, I might have glimpsed him near the main gate as I left the garden. He was locking up, I think, but it was dark and I wasn't paying much attention." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her expression remained serene. Mr. Wren had claimed to be in his quarters by 10, yet Mrs. Henshaw placed him at the gate later. A discrepancy, however small, was a thread to tug. She set her knitting aside, folding her hands. "You've been most helpful, Mrs. Henshaw. It's so easy to miss things in the excitement of an evening. But I wonder, did you notice the ground near the statue? Any marks, perhaps, or anything out of place?" Mrs. Henshaw's smile froze, and for a moment her eyes darted to the window, as if seeking an escape. "Marks? Oh, I wouldn't have noticed anything like that. I was too busy admiring the statue itself. It's all a blur now, I'm afraid." She laughed, but it was a brittle sound, and Miss Marple noted the way her fingers tightened on her teacup. Rising, Miss Marple thanked her warmly, her manner as gracious as if they'd discussed nothing more than the weather. "You must come for tea at my cottage sometime," she said. "It's been such a pleasure." As Mrs. Henshaw departed, her scarf fluttering behind her, Miss Marple lingered at the table, her thoughts weaving a delicate pattern. Mrs. Henshaw's story was plausible. A restless guest, drawn to the statue's beauty, wandering the gardens alone. Yet her unease at certain questions, her quickness to point to Mr. Baxter, and the vague origin of her costly brooch suggested more beneath the surface. Miss Marple recalled a young woman in St. Mary Mead who'd once pawned a stolen bracelet to fund a trip abroad, her charm masking her deceit. Mrs. Henshaw was no petty thief, but her flair for drama could conceal a deeper role in the theft. Outside, the village square bustled with life, but Miss Marple's mind was on the garden, the scuff mark, the waxy smudge, the orchid petal, and now Mrs. Henshaw's rustle in the bushes. The widow's presence near the statue placed her at the scene, and her vague answers hinted at something unspoken. Was she a witness, an accomplice, or merely a distraction? Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her lips curving faintly. The guest's tale was charming, but charm, she knew, could be a mask, and masks in St. Mary Mead always slipped in time. Chapter 6. The Collector's Ambition. The Grand Hotel, a stately red-brick establishment on the outskirts of St. Mary Mead, exuded an air of faded elegance, its ivy-clad facade and tall windows hinting at grander days. Miss Jane Marple approached its entrance with her characteristic unhurried grace, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, her eyes bright beneath the brim of her sensible hat. She had arranged to meet Mr. Roland Baxter, the wealthy collector whose intense interest in the Weeping Muse had not gone unnoticed at the exhibition. His polished charm and rumoured obsession with rare art made him a figure of intrigue, and Miss Marple was eager to test the waters of his composure. The hotel's lounge was a study in opulence, with plush armchairs, gleaming mahogany tables, and a chandelier that cast soft prisms across the room. Mr. Baxter awaited her at a corner table, his tailored suit impeccable, his silver hair neatly combed. He rose as she approached, his smile warm but practiced, like an actor stepping into a familiar role. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "What a pleasure! I understand you're looking into this unfortunate business with the statue. How may I assist?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her movements as delicate as the porcelain teapot a waiter placed before them. "You're very kind, Mr. Baxter," she replied, her tone mild but her gaze steady. "I've heard you're quite an admirer of the Weeping Muse. It must be a great disappointment to learn of its theft." His smile tightened, though only for an instant. "A tragedy, truly," he said, pouring tea with a steady hand. "It's a masterpiece. Varnum's finest, I'd wager. Its loss is a blow to the art world, not just to Lady Ashbourne." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly as she drew them from her bag. "You seem to know a great deal about it. I understand you made an offer to purchase it. Quite a generous one, I believe." Mr. Baxter's eyes flickered, but he leaned back, his posture relaxed. "I did. I collect rare pieces, you see. Works that deserve to be preserved, appreciated. I offered Varnum a substantial sum, but he's a stubborn sort. Said it wasn't for sale." He chuckled, though the sound lacked warmth. "Some artists don't understand the value of their own work." "How fascinating," Miss Marple said, her eyes never leaving his face. "And where do you display such treasures? In a gallery, perhaps, or a private collection?" He waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, I've a place in the country, a garden, actually, where I keep my finest pieces. Outdoors, where they can breathe, you know. Statues like the Weeping Muse belong in nature, not locked in some dusty museum." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind latching onto his words. A garden? She recalled the gardening magazine she'd glimpsed in his suite during a brief visit to the hotel with Lady Ashbourne, open to an article on private outdoor displays. A garden sounds lovely, she said. You must spend a great deal of time there. Were you at the hotel all evening after the exhibition, or did you perhaps visit your estate? Mr. Baxter's smile didn't waver, but his fingers tightened slightly on his teacup. I was here, he said smoothly. Had dinner in the dining room, then retired early. The exhibition was exhausting. Too many people, too much chatter. I needed a quiet night. Miss Marple nodded, though she noted the faint edge in his voice. She had spoken earlier with a hotel maid, a timid girl who'd confided that Mr. Baxter's room had been empty when she'd turned down the beds at 10. A small discrepancy, but enough to stir her curiosity. It must be difficult, she said, to see a piece you admire so much vanish. Do you think it could be recovered? He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with something akin to eagerness. Oh, I hope so. Though whoever took it must be clever. Moving a statue that heavy takes planning. They'd need a vehicle, accomplices, a place to hide it. Not a simple task. Indeed, Miss Marple murmured, her mind flashing to the tire tracks near the service gate and the waxy smudge on the pedestal. It would require someone with resources, wouldn't it? Someone who knows the value of art and has the means to acquire it discreetly. Mr. Baxter's laugh was soft, almost indulgent. You have a sharp mind, Miss Marple. Yes, it would take someone with means, but I'm no thief if that's what you're wondering. I prefer to buy my art, not steal it. Of course, she said, her smile disarming. She glanced at the table, where a leather-bound notebook lay half-hidden beneath a folded newspaper. Its edge bore a faint green smudge, not unlike the paint she'd seen on a shed at Ashbourne Hall. You keep such interesting reading, she remarked, nodding toward the gardening magazine, now visible beside the notebook. Are you planning a new display for your garden? He followed her gaze, and for a moment his composure slipped, his hand moving to cover the notebook. Just passing the time, he said quickly. I find gardening soothing, helps me think. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes twinkling. It's a wonderful hobby. My nephew Raymond has a little garden, though he's forever battling slugs. Do you have a shed for your tools, Mr. Baxter? I noticed a lovely green-painted one at the estate. It reminded me of something. His jaw tightened, but he recovered swiftly, offering a smile. I've a shed or two, yes. Standard green paint, I'm afraid. Nothing remarkable. She let the subject drop, her needles resuming their rhythm. You've been most helpful, Mr. Baxter. I do hope the statue is found soon. It would be a shame for such a piece to be hidden away. As she rose, thanking him warmly, Miss Marple's mind was alive with connections. The green smudge on the notebook, the maid's report of his absence, his talk of a private garden. They painted a picture of a man with motive and opportunity. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead where a wealthy merchant had acquired a rival's prize roses, claiming they'd been gifted. Mr. Baxter's charm was a polished veneer, but beneath it lay a hunger for possession that could easily spill into theft. Stepping into the hotel's garden, Miss Marple paused to admire a bed of late-blooming dahlias, her thoughts weaving a delicate web. The collector's ambition was clear, but was it enough to make him a thief? The tire tracks, The waxy smudge, Mrs. Henshaw's rustle, Farnham's wheelbarrow, Wren's new key, all were threads in a tapestry growing ever more intricate. She adjusted her hat, her lips curving faintly. Mr. Baxter's ambition was a bright thread, but whether it led to guilt or merely greed, only time and her quiet persistence would reveal. Chapter 7. A Clue in the Grass. The gardens of Ashbourne Hall, though still radiant with late summer blooms, carried a subtle air of disquiet as Miss Jane Marple returned to the scene of the theft. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns, and the empty pedestal where the Weeping Muse had stood seemed to mock the festive spirit of the exhibition. Miss Marple, her knitting bag slung over her arm, moved with quiet purpose, her sensible shoes whispering against the grass. She had resolved to examine the grounds herself, trusting that the earth might yield secrets overlooked by the constable's well-meaning but cursory inspection. Her eyes, sharp beneath the brim of her hat, scanned the area with the patience of one accustomed to unravelling life's subtler knots. The pedestal stood in a small clearing, ringed by low hedges and a gravel path that wound towards the service gate. Miss Marple knelt beside it, her movements careful to avoid disturbing the scene. The scuff mark she had noted earlier remained, a faint smear in the dew-damp grass, no more than a foot long and shallow, as if something heavy had been lifted rather than dragged. She traced its edge with a gloved finger, noting its direction toward the rear of the garden. It was a deliberate mark, suggesting caution, a thief who took pains to avoid detection. As she straightened, her gaze fell on a tiny glint half hidden in the grass. She bent again, retrieving a small chip of marble, no larger than a sixpence, its surface smooth and white, unmistakably from the Weeping Muse. What caught her attention, however, was a faint fleck of green paint on its edge, barely visible, but distinct against the stone's purity. Miss Marple turned it over in her hand, her mind racing. The statue was unadorned marble, free of any paint. This fleck suggested contact with another surface, a tool perhaps or a structure. She tucked the chip into her handbag, alongside the orchid petal she'd found earlier, and continued her inspection. The gravel path nearby showed no clear footprints, but a few pebbles were displaced, scattered as if by a hurried step. Miss Marple followed the path toward the service gate, her eyes scanning the ground. Near a cluster of ferns, she spotted another clue. A single blade of grass, bent and smeared with a waxy residue, not unlike the smudge she'd seen on the pedestal's base. She crouched, examining it closely. The wax was pale, almost translucent, suggesting a glove or a cloth used to grip something heavy, perhaps to avoid leaving fingerprints. She made a mental note to inquire about the groundskeeper's tools, wondering if any were coated with such a substance. As she approached the service gate, Miss Marple paused to study the tire tracks she'd noticed the previous day. They were faint but unmistakable, pressed into the soft earth just beyond the gate. The tread was wide, suggesting a vehicle heavier than a bicycle or cart, possibly a van, as the groundskeeper had mentioned hearing one in the village. She knelt again, her fingers brushing the soil. The tracks were fresh, likely from the night of the theft, and they veered toward a narrow lane that led to the main road. Whoever had driven the vehicle had chosen this secluded route, far from the prying eyes of Ashbourne Hall. Miss Marple stood, her gaze lingering on the gate's lock. It was intact, its heavy padlock gleaming as if polished, just as Constable Hargreaves had reported. Yet Mr. Wren's insistence on his new key nagged at her. A duplicate, perhaps, could have allowed access without forcing the lock. She recalled Mr. Varnum's wheelbarrow, its wheel caked with similar soil, and Mr. Baxter's notebook with its green smudge, so like the paint on the marble chip. Mrs. Henshaw's rustle in the bushes added another layer, suggesting a witness, or perhaps a participant, in the night's events. A groundskeeper, a wiry lad named Tom, approached, his cap in hand. "Beg pardon, Miss Marple," he said, "but the constable said you might be looking for clues. Anything I can help with?" Miss Marple smiled, her manner as warm as a village tea party. "You're very kind, Tom. Tell me, do you know of any sheds or tools painted green around the estate? Something that might leave a mark like this?" She held up the marble chip, careful not to touch the painted fleck. Tom squinted, scratching his head. "There's a shed by the back wall, miss, where we keep the gardening tools. Painted green it is, though it's old and peeling. Could be that's what you're after." "And do you use any waxy cloths or gloves for handling equipment?" she asked, her tone casual. Tom nodded. "Aye, we've got some waxed gloves for heavy work. Keeps the hands clean when moving stone or metal. They're in the shed mostly." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind fitting the pieces together. A green-painted shed, waxed gloves, a heavy vehicle, the clues pointed to a careful operation, one that required access to the estate's resources. She walked to the shed Tom had mentioned. A weathered structure half hidden by ivy. Its paint was indeed peeling, but the green matched the fleck on the marble chip. She examined the door, noting a faint scratch where something heavy might have scraped against it. The shed was locked, but its padlock was older, less pristine than the gates, suggesting it was less frequently checked. As she returned to the pedestal, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to her suspects. Mr. Wren, with his keys and nervous manner, could have accessed the shed and gate. Mr. Varnum's wheelbarrow and solitary habits made him a candidate for moving the statue, perhaps to reclaim his work. Mrs. Henshaw's presence in the garden placed her dangerously close to the crime. And Mr. Baxter, with his private garden and resources, had both motive and means to orchestrate a theft. The green paint tied the crime to the estate, but it also hinted at an outsider's involvement, someone who knew the grounds well enough to use its tools. She paused by a rose bush, its petals trembling in the breeze, and recalled a theft in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a silver candlestick vanished from the church. The culprit, a choir boy, had used a gardener's cart to move it, leaving a trail of wax from a candle he'd carried. The memory sharpened her focus. Clues like wax and paint were often the threads that unraveled a mystery. The marble chip, the waxy grass, the tire tracks, they were a map, incomplete but pointing to a truth buried in the grass of Ashburn Hall. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her lips curving faintly. The clue in the grass was small, but it was enough to keep her weaving the delicate web of suspicion. She would need to speak with the constable about the van, and perhaps revisit Mr. Baxter's hotel to inquire about his staff. For now, she walked back toward the manor, her mind as sharp as the needles in her bag. The garden held its secrets tightly, but Miss Marple was patient, and patience, she knew, always brought the truth to light. Chapter 8. The Village Gossip. The heart of St. Mary Mead pulsed gently in its tea shop, a cosy establishment with lace curtains and tables adorned with crisp white cloths. The air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed tea and warm scones, and the low hum of conversation wove a tapestry of village life. Miss Jane Marple sat at her usual table by the window, her knitting bag at her side, her eyes bright as she listened to the chatter around her. She had come to the tea shop not for refreshment alone, but to tap into the undercurrent of gossip that flowed through St. Mary Mead like a river through a valley. The theft of the Weeping Muse had set tongues wagging, and Miss Marple knew that village talk, however trivial it seemed, often held the seeds of truth. Mrs. Phipps, the tea shop's proprietress, bustled over with a fresh pot of Earl Grey, her round face alight with the thrill of recent events. "Oh, Miss Marple, isn't it dreadful about the statue?" she said, setting the pot down with a clink. "The whole village is talking. Such a scandal. Who'd have thought it, right here in St. Mary Mead?" "Quite shocking," Miss Marple agreed, her tone mild, but her ears attuned to every nuance. "I suppose everyone has their theories. Have you heard anything interesting, Mrs. Phipps?" Mrs. Phipps leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, I shouldn't say, but Mr. Wren was in here yesterday looking ever so jumpy. Ordered a tea and barely touched it, just kept fidgeting with his watch. And, don't tell a soul, I heard from Mrs. Bantry's maid that he was at the bank in Much Benham last week, trying to get a loan. Turned down flat, they say." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she drew her knitting from her bag, her expression one of polite interest. "How curious," she said. "Mr. Wren does seem under strain. Perhaps the exhibition has been more taxing than we realize." Mrs. Phipps nodded sagely. "That's what I said to Mr. Phipps. And then there's that sculptor, Mr. Varnum. Odd man, keeps to himself. The grocer's boy, young Jimmy, saw his wheelbarrow out near the estate's back gate the night the statue went missing. Covered in mud it was, and not the sort you find in his yard." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained serene. The wheelbarrow, with its soil matching the estate's, was a thread she'd already noted. Jimmy's observation placed it near the service gate, strengthening the link. "A wheelbarrow, you say? How observant of Jimmy. Did he see anything else?" Mrs. Phipps hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "Well, he did mention a van, unfamiliar, dark-coloured, parked in the lane by the estate around midnight. Didn't think much of it till now. But with the theft, well, it's suspicious, isn't it?" "Very," Miss Marple murmured, her mind flashing to the tyre tracks she'd seen beyond the service gate. A van, a wheelbarrow, a waxy smudge. Each clue tightened the web. She sipped her tea, encouraging Mrs. Phipps to continue. "And then there's Mrs. Henshaw," Mrs. Phipps went on, her voice brimming with relish. "Always so grand with her silks and jewels. Mrs. Cleary at the post office heard her boasting about a special gift she's planning to show off in London. Something to make them all jealous, she said. Now, I'm not one to judge, but that brooch of hers, new and ever so costly, didn't come cheap, did it?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her thoughts turning to Mrs. Henshaw's sapphire brooch and her evasive answers at the inn. A gift she'd claimed, but from whom? And the talk of a special gift raised questions. Could it be connected to the statue, or was it merely the widow's flair for drama? "Mrs. Henshaw does have a certain style," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "I suppose she's made quite an impression here." "Oh, indeed," Mrs. Phipps said. "And Mr. Baxter, that collector, fancy man, isn't he?" The butcher's wife saw him in Much Benham 2 days ago, talking to a man who hires out vans. "Looked secretive," she said, all hushed voices and quick glances. "Mind you, she's got a nose for trouble, that one." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, though her mind was racing. Mr. Baxter's absence from the hotel, his green-smudged notebook, and now this report of a van rental. They painted a picture of a man with means and motive. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead shopkeeper, who'd once hired a cart to smuggle pilfered goods. His secrecy betrayed by a neighbour's sharp eyes. "How interesting," she said. "The village does keep a close watch, doesn't it?" Mrs. Phipps beamed, pleased to be of use. "That we do, Miss Marple. If there's more to hear, I'll let you know. Shall I fetch you another scone?" Miss Marple declined politely, her thoughts already weaving the new threads into her tapestry. As Mrs. Phipps bustled away, Miss Marple turned her attention to the other patrons. At a nearby table, 2 women discussed the theft in hushed tones, their words drifting to her ears. "I heard Mr. Wren bought a new lock for the gate," one said. "Odd, don't you think, right before the theft?" The other nodded, adding, "And Mrs. Henshaw was seen near the garden late that night, all alone. Bold for a lady, if you ask me." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind cataloguing the gossip. Mr. Wren's new lock, Varnum's wheelbarrow, Mrs. Henshaw's nocturnal stroll, Mr. Baxter's van, each was a fragment, but together they formed a pattern. She thought of the marble chip with its green paint, the waxy blade of grass, the tire tracks. The village's chatter, though prone to embellishment, often held a kernel of truth, and Miss Marple was adept at sifting fact from fancy. She rose, leaving a few coins on the table, and stepped into the village square, where the afternoon sun bathed the cobblestones in gold. The gossip had given her much to ponder, but it also raised new questions. Why had Mr. Wren needed a new lock? Was Varnum's wheelbarrow merely a coincidence, or had he ventured out that night? Could Mrs. Henshaw's special gift be more than boastful talk? And Mr. Baxter's secretive meeting, did it point to a planned theft, or something else entirely? As she walked toward her cottage, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead, when a grocer's wife had spread rumours of a stolen necklace, only for the truth to emerge from a casual remark at the butcher's. Gossip was a mirror, reflecting truths distorted by human nature. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her lips curving faintly. The village had spoken, and its words, like the clues in the grass, were leading her closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 9. The Hidden Motive. The drawing-room of Ashbourne Hall was a haven of quiet elegance, its tall windows admitting the soft glow of late afternoon light that danced across polished wood and velvet upholstery. Miss Jane Marple sat near the fireplace, her knitting bag at her side. Her demeanour as serene as the ticking of the mantel clock. Lady Ashbourne had graciously arranged for the 4 suspects, Mr. Percival Wren, Mr. Felix Varnum, Mrs. Clara Henshaw, and Mr. Roland Baxter, to gather under the pretence of discussing the ongoing investigation into the theft of the Weeping Muse. Miss Marple had requested the meeting. knowing that bringing the suspects together might reveal tensions or slip-ups that individual conversations could not. Her eyes, bright and observant beneath her modest hat, missed nothing as the group assembled. Mr. Wren arrived first, his thin frame taut with nervous energy, his spectacles glinting as he glanced at the door. He clutched a notebook, its pages filled with meticulous lists of exhibition details, as if order could shield him from suspicion. Mr. Varnum followed, his heavy boots leaving faint traces of stone dust on the rug, his scowl deepening as he took a seat as far from the others as possible. Mrs. Henshaw swept in with her usual flourish, her silk scarf trailing like a banner, her sapphire brooch catching the light. Mr. Baxter entered last, his polished smile firmly in place, though his eyes flicked warily over the group. Lady Ashbourne, hovering near the tea tray, welcomed them with strained courtesy. "Miss Marple has been kind enough to assist us," she said, her voice tinged with hope. "She thought a discussion might shed light on this dreadful affair. I trust you'll all cooperate." Miss Marple smiled, her tone gentle but deliberate. "Thank you, Lady Ashbourne. I'm merely trying to piece things together, as one does with a puzzle. The theft of the Weeping Muse is most perplexing, but I've found a few curious details." She paused, her needles clicking softly as she drew her knitting from her bag. "For instance, a small chip of marble from the statue, found near the pedestal." The room stilled. Mr. Wren's fingers tightened on his notebook. Mr. Varnum's scowl deepened, Mrs. Henshaw's smile froze, and Mr. Baxter's gaze sharpened. Miss Marple continued, her voice as mild as if discussing the weather. "What's interesting is the green paint on it. Not from the statue, of course, but perhaps from something it touched. A tool, or a shed, like the one by the estate's back wall." Mr. Baxter leaned forward, his tone smooth but edged. "Green paint is common enough, Miss Marple. Any number of things could leave such a mark." "Quite so," she agreed, her eyes meeting his. "But it's a specific shade, isn't it? Much like the shed at your country estate, Mr. Baxter. I understand you keep your gardening tools there." His smile tightened, and a faint flush crept up his neck. "My shed? I suppose it's green, but I hardly see the connection. I was at the hotel all night, as I told you." Mrs. Henshaw's laugh broke the tension, though it sounded forced. "Really, Miss Marple, you do have an imagination. Green paint could come from anywhere. Why, I saw a groundskeeper with a green-painted wheelbarrow near the gate that evening." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze shifting to Mrs. Henshaw. "How observant of you, Mrs. Henshaw. You were in the garden quite late, weren't you? You mentioned a rustle in the bushes. Perhaps you saw more than you realized." Mrs. Henshaw's fingers brushed her brooch, her eyes darting to Mr. Wren. I only glanced at the wheelbarrow. It was near the statue, I think, but I was too busy admiring the roses to notice much else." Mr. Wren shifted uncomfortably, his voice sharp. "That wheelbarrow belongs to the estate, not me. I was in my quarters by 10, as I said. I don't know why everyone keeps pointing fingers at me." Mr. Varnum, who had been silent, snorted. "Because you had the keys, Wren, and you're always fussing about money. Maybe you sold the statue to pay your debts." Mr. Wren flushed crimson, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "That's slander. I'd never betray Lady Ashbourne. You're the one who didn't care about the statue. Said it was just stone." Mr. Varnum's eyes blazed, but he said nothing, his bandaged hand clenching. Miss Marple watched the exchange, noting the undercurrents of resentment. She spoke again, her tone disarming. "There's another detail. A delivery van seen near the estate at midnight. Quite unusual, don't you think? Especially since no deliveries were scheduled." Mrs. Henshaw's teacup rattled in its saucer, and Mr. Baxter's smile faltered briefly. Mr. Wren stammered, "A van. I heard a noise, as I told you, but I thought it was the wind." Mr. Varnum merely shrugged, his expression unreadable. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on each face. "It's curious how these things connect, isn't it? A van, a wheelbarrow, green paint, a waxy smudge on the grass. And of course, the motives, pride perhaps, or financial need, or a passion for art." She looked at Mr. Baxter, her gaze steady. "Or the desire to possess something rare, to keep it all to oneself." Mr. Baxter's jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly, his voice smooth. "You're quite the detective, Miss Marple, but I assure you, my passion is for collecting legally. I'd never stoop to theft." Miss Marple smiled, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Of course, Mr. Baxter. I'm only trying to understand. Motives are often hidden, like the roots of a plant, but they always show themselves in time." The room grew quiet, the weight of her words settling over the group. Lady Ashbourne, sensing the tension, offered more tea, but the suspects were subdued, each lost in their thoughts. Miss Marple rose, thanking them for their time, her manner as gracious as ever. As they dispersed, she lingered by the window, her eyes on the garden beyond. The empty pedestal stood like a silent witness, its secrets locked in the clues she'd gathered. The marble chip, the green paint, the tire, tracks, the waxy grass. She recalled a St. Mary Mead incident where a hidden motive, jealousy over a rival's roses, had led to a stolen prize bloom. Here the motives were tangled. Mr. Wren's debts, Varnum's pride, Mrs. Henshaw's mysterious gifts, Mr. Baxter's obsession. The green paint tied the theft to the estate, but Mr. Baxter's reaction to its mention suggested a deeper connection. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her lips curving faintly. The hidden motive was there, buried in the glances and silences of this room. She would need to tug one more thread to bring it to light. Chapter 10. The Trap. The twilight air hung soft and cool over Ashbourne Hall, the gardens cloaked in a gentle hush, as the last rays of sunlight gilded the rose beds. Miss Jane Marple stood near the manor's terrace, her knitting bag at her side, her eyes scanning the grounds with quiet intent. The theft of the Weeping Muse had stirred St. Mary Mead into a frenzy of speculation, and Miss Marple, with her delicate web of clues, green paint, waxy grass, tire tracks, and whispered gossip, had resolved to set a trap to catch the thief. She had enlisted Lady Ashbourne's help, proposing a subtle ruse that would tempt the culprit into revealing themselves. The plan was simple yet cunning, in the way of village schemes. Miss Marple suggested that Lady Ashbourne announce a private viewing of another rare statue, a supposed companion piece to the Weeping Muse, to be displayed in the garden that evening. The news was spread discreetly through the village, via Mrs. Phipps at the tea shop, the postmistress, and a few well-placed remarks at the inn, ensuring it reached the ears of Mr. Wren, Mr. Varnum, Mrs. Henshaw, and Mr. Baxter. The statue, in truth, was a plaster replica from Lady Ashbourne's attic, draped in a cloth to mimic value, placed near the same pedestal where the Weeping Muse had stood. Miss Marple's hope was that the thief, emboldened by their success, might attempt to strike again, or at least betray their guilt through some telltale action. She had coordinated with Constable Hargreaves, who, though initially sceptical of her fanciful notions, agreed to hide near the garden with a young deputy. Miss Marple herself took up a position behind a thick yew hedge, her dark shawl blending with the shadows, her knitting left behind to avoid any betraying click of needles. The garden was quiet, save for the distant hoot of an owl and the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. The replica statue stood under a tarp, its silhouette deliberately enticing, illuminated faintly by a lantern placed to mimic moonlight. As the clock in the manor struck 11, Miss Marple's senses sharpened. She had positioned herself near the service gate, where the tire tracks and waxy grass had been found, suspecting it as the thief's likely route. Her thoughts turned over the clues. The green paint matching Mr. Baxter's shed, Mr. Wren's new key, Mrs. Henshaw's late-night wanderings, Mr. Varnum's muddy wheelbarrow. Each suspect had opportunity, but Mr. Baxter's obsession with rare art and his absence from the hotel on the night of the theft weighed heavily in her mind. The village gossip about his van rental only tightened the thread. A faint crunch of gravel broke her reverie. She peered through the hedge, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. A figure moved stealthily across the lawn, cloaked in a dark coat, a flashlight's beam darting briefly before being extinguished. The figure paused by the pedestal, then approached the tarp-covered statue, their movements cautious but purposeful. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained calm. The figure produced a small tool, a crowbar perhaps, and began to pry at the lock on a nearby shed, the same green-painted one she'd examined. Constable Hargreaves, hidden behind a rose trellis, gave a low whistle, the signal to move. He and his deputy stepped forward, their lanterns casting a sudden glow. "Hold there!" Hargreaves called, his voice firm but startled. The figure froze, then turned, revealing the sharp features and silver hair of Mr. Roland Baxter. His polished composure was gone, replaced by a look of cornered desperation, the crowbar glinting in his hand. "Mr. Baxter," Miss Marple said, stepping from the hedge, her voice as gentle as if greeting a neighbour. "I thought you might be curious about our little display." Baxter's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly, dropping the crowbar with a forced laugh. "Miss Marple, Constable, I was merely checking the grounds. I heard about this new statue and thought I'd ensure it was safe. With the theft and all, a commendable concern," Miss Marple said, her tone mild but her gaze unwavering. "But rather late for a stroll, don't you think? And with a crowbar? Most curious." Hargreaves, less inclined to subtlety, stepped forward, his lantern raised. "You were trying to break into that shed, sir. Care to explain why?" Baxter's smile faltered, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "A misunderstanding, I assure you. I thought I heard a noise, thought I'd investigate. I'm no thief." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes catching the faint green smudge on his coat sleeve. "Matching the paint on the marble chip. Perhaps not," she said, "but you seem very familiar with this shed. And I believe you were not at the hotel the night the Weeping Muse vanished, despite your claim. A maid confirmed your absence, and a van was seen near the estate, much like the one you were overheard arranging in Much Benham." Baxter's face paled, his charm crumbling under her steady scrutiny. He opened his mouth to protest, but Miss Marple continued, her voice soft but relentless. "The green paint on the statue's chip, the tire tracks, the waxy gloves from the shed, it all points to a careful plan. And your passion for rare art, Mr. Baxter, is well known. A private garden, you said, where such treasures could breathe. I wonder if the Weeping Muse is breathing there now." Hargreaves, sensing the moment, clapped a hand on Baxter's shoulder. "Come along, sir. We'll have a proper talk at the station, and I'll be searching that estate of yours, if you don't mind." Baxter's shoulders slumped, his defiance draining away. Miss Marple watched as he was led off, her expression serene, but her mind alive with satisfaction. The trap had worked, not because of force, but because of human nature's predictability. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead poacher, caught when he couldn't resist checking a snare he'd set. Greed, like pride, always lured the guilty back. As the constable escorted Baxter away, Miss Marple lingered by the pedestal, the replica statue still under its tarp. The garden was quiet again, the night reclaiming its peace. She adjusted her shawl, her lips curving faintly. The trap had sprung, but the statue's hiding place remained a question. Mr. Baxter's estate was the next step, and Miss Marple was certain the truth, like the statue itself, was waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 11. The Confession. The library of Ashbourne Hall was a sanctuary of polished oak and leather-bound volumes, its air heavy with the scent of old paper and wax polish. A fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the room, as Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting bag at her feet, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The morning after the trap had sprung was bright and crisp, but within the library a sombre mood prevailed. Mr. Roland Baxter sat across from her, his polished charm replaced by a weary slump, his silver hair dishevelled, his eyes shadowed with resignation. Constable Hargreaves stood by the door, his notebook open, while Lady Ashburn hovered near a window, her face a mixture of relief and distress. The constable's search of Mr. Baxter's country estate, conducted at dawn with Miss Marple's quiet guidance, had yielded the prize, the Weeping Muse, hidden beneath a tarp in a green-painted shed, its marble surface unmarred save for a faint scrape along its base. The discovery had prompted Mr. Baxter's swift removal to Ashbourne Hall for questioning, and now, under Miss Marple's steady gaze, the moment of truth had arrived. "Mr. Baxter," Miss Marple began, her voice as gentle as a village breeze, "you've caused quite a stir in St. Mary Mead. The statue has been found, and I believe you know more about its journey than you've let on. Would you care to explain?" Baxter's shoulders sagged further, his hands clasped tightly, as if to anchor himself. He glanced at the constable, then at Lady Ashbourne, before meeting Miss Marple's eyes. Her calm, unyielding scrutiny seemed to unravel his last defences. "Very well," he said, his voice low, almost a sigh. "I took it. I couldn't resist." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged, though her mind was alert, piecing together the final threads of the mystery. "Perhaps you could start from the beginning," she suggested, her tone encouraging but firm. "It's always clearer that way." Baxter drew a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the fire. "It began with the statue itself," he said. "The Weeping Muse. I'd never seen anything like it. The moment I saw it at the exhibition, I knew I had to have it. Not for a gallery, not for profit, but for my garden, my private sanctuary. I collect rare pieces, Miss Marple, but this was different. It spoke to me." He paused, his fingers tracing the arm of his chair. "I offered Varnum a fortune, but he refused. Said it wasn't for sale, that it belonged to the world. I tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't budge. So I made other plans." Miss Marple's eyes flickered with understanding, though she said nothing, letting his words flow. Baxter continued, his voice growing steadier, as if relieved to unburden himself. "I knew the estate's layout from previous visits. Lady Ashbourne's exhibitions are no secret to collectors like me. I noticed the service gate, rarely used, and the shed nearby. I hired a van in Much Benham discreetly, and enlisted a man, a driver I'd used before for delicate acquisitions. He asked no questions." "And the gate?" Miss Marple prompted gently. "How did you manage the lock?" Baxter's lips twisted in a wry smile. Wren's carelessness helped. He left his keys on a table during the exhibition setup, and I had a duplicate made. Simple enough, if you know the right people. That night, I waited until the grounds were quiet. My driver parked the van in the lane, and we used waxed gloves from the shed to move the statue, carefully so as not to damage it. The wheelbarrow was already there, left by some groundskeeper. It made the job easier. Miss Marple nodded, her mind aligning his account with the clues. The waxy grass, the tire tracks, the green paint from the shed's door scraping the statue's base. "And the scuff mark by the pedestal?" she asked. Baxter shrugged. "An accident. We lifted the statue, but it brushed the grass as we set it down briefly. We were quick, moved it to the van, then to my estate. I hid it in the shed, thinking I'd arrange a proper display later. I didn't expect—" He trailed off, glancing at her. "I didn't expect you, Miss Marple." She smiled faintly, her hands still folded. "People often underestimate the village, Mr. Baxter, but St. Mary Mead has a way of noticing things. The maid who saw your empty room, the butcher's wife who overheard your van rental, the grocer's boy who spotted the wheelbarrow, they all played their part." Baxter's face darkened, but he nodded. "I should have known. I thought I was clever, but you saw through it all. The paint, the van, the key." Constable Hargreaves, scribbling in his notebook, looked up. "You'll be answering for this, Mr. Baxter. Theft, conspiracy, serious charges, and your driver." "He's long gone," Baxter said bitterly. "Paid him to leave the county. You'll not find him easily." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes catching a detail. "And Mrs. Henshaw? She was in the garden that night. Did she see you?" Baxter hesitated, then shook his head. "If she did, she said nothing. I saw her wandering earlier, but by the time we moved the statue, the grounds were clear. Wren was in his quarters, Varnum at his cottage. It was just us and the night." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly, satisfied that Mrs. Henshaw's rustle in the bushes was likely innocent, though her evasiveness still warranted a closer look. Mr. Wren's debts and Varnum's pride, too, were mere distractions, their secrets unrelated to the theft. The green paint, the waxy gloves, the tire tracks, all pointed to Baxter, whose obsession had driven him to cross a line. Lady Ashbourne, who had been listening silently, stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Why, Mr. Baxter? You could have bought countless works of art. Why steal this one?" Baxter's eyes softened, almost wistful, because it was unique. It wasn't just art. It was a feeling, a moment captured in stone. I wanted it for myself, to see it every day in my garden. I lost my way. Miss Marple rose, her expression kind but resolute. "Greed has a way of clouding judgment, Mr. Baxter, but the truth always finds its way out, like a weed through a crack." She recalled a saint, Mary Mead merchant who'd hoarded stolen goods, undone by a neighbour's chance remark. Human nature, she knew, was predictable in its flaws. Hargreaves escorted Baxter out, promising to return the statue to its pedestal. Lady Ashbourne sank into a chair, her relief palpable. "Jane, you're a marvel," she said. "How did you know?" Miss Marple smiled, adjusting her hat. "Oh, just a matter of listening, my dear. People tell you more than they realise, if you know where to look." As she stepped into the hall, the morning light streaming through the windows, Miss Marple felt the familiar satisfaction of a puzzle solved. The confession had tied the threads, paint, wax, tracks, and motive into a neat knot. But a few loose ends remained, and she resolved to keep an eye on Mrs. Henshaw's mysterious gifts. For now, though, the mystery of the Weeping Muse was laid bare, and St. Mary Mead could breathe a little easier. Chapter 12. The Restoration. The gardens of Ashbourne Hall shimmered under a clear noon sky, their colours restored to vibrant life, as if the theft of the Weeping Muse had been but a fleeting shadow. The statue stood once more on its pedestal, its marble form gleaming in the sunlight, the sorrowful curve of its features untouched by the ordeal. A small crowd of villagers and guests had gathered for its reinstallation, their murmurs a blend of relief and admiration. Lady Ashbourne, resplendent in a lavender gown, stood at the centre, her face radiant with gratitude as she addressed the onlookers. "It is with great joy," she said, her voice carrying over the rosebeds, "that we welcome the Weeping Muse back to Ashbourne Hall. Thanks to the diligence of our dear friend Miss Marple and the efforts of Constable Hargreaves, this treasure has been restored to us." Miss Jane Marple stood to one side, her knitting bag at her feet, her modest hat tilted slightly against the sun. She smiled gently, deflecting the applause with a small wave of her hand, her eyes bright with quiet satisfaction. The reinstallation was a triumph, but her mind lingered on the delicate threads that had unravelled the mystery. The green paint, the waxy grass, the tyre tracks, and Mr. Baxter's fateful confession. The other suspects were present, their roles in the affair now clarified. Mr. Percival Wren, his nervous demeanour softened by relief, hovered near the pedestal, adjusting the velvet ropes with renewed care. His debts, Miss Marple had learned, were real but unrelated to the theft, a private struggle he'd kept hidden out of pride. Mr. Felix Varnum stood apart, his gruff exterior unchanged, though his bandaged hand and muddy wheelbarrow had proven to be mere coincidences, marks of his solitary work, not guilt. Mrs. Clara Henshaw, her silk scarf fluttering, mingled with the crowd, her sapphire brooch glinting as she laughed. Her late-night wanderings and vague answers had stemmed from vanity, Miss Marple suspected, and a desire to be at the heart of the drama, not from complicity. Mr. Roland Baxter was absent, detained by Constable Hargreaves, pending charges of theft and conspiracy. His country estate, searched thoroughly, had revealed not only the Weeping Muse, but a small cachet of other questionably acquired artefacts, enough to keep the authorities busy for weeks. Miss Marple felt a pang of pity for him. His passion for art, however misguided, had been genuine, but greed, she knew, had a way of twisting even the purest desires. As the crowd dispersed, Lady Ashbourne approached, her eyes shining. "Jane, you've saved the day," she said, clasping Miss Marple's hands. "I don't know how you did it. Those little clues, those quiet questions. You're a marvel." Miss Marple's smile was modest, her voice soft. "Oh, it's just a matter of noticing, my dear. People are like gardens. They show their secrets if you look closely enough." She glanced at the statue, its marble face serene yet poignant, and thought of a saint. Mary Mead widow, who'd once hidden a stolen locket out of spite, only to be undone by a neighbour's chance remark. The restoration of the Weeping Muse was more than the return of stone. It was the mending of trust in a village that thrived on its quiet harmony. Miss Marple declined Lady Ashburn's invitation to stay for luncheon, preferring the solitude of her cottage. As she walked down the lane, the village unfolding in its familiar rhythm, children playing, shopkeepers sweeping, the church bell tolling softly, her mind turned over the case. The green paint had linked the statue to Baxter's shed, the waxy gloves to his careful plan, the tyre tracks to his hired van. Mrs. Henshaw's rustle, Mr. Wren's debts, Mr. Varnum's wheelbarrow, each had been a distraction, but Miss Marple had learned long ago to sift through the noise of human nature to find the truth. At her cottage, she settled by the fire, her knitting needles resuming their steady rhythm. The mystery was solved, the statue restored, but St. Mary Mead, she knew, would soon whisper of new secrets. A faint smile curved her lips as she thought of the village's endless capacity for surprises. For now, though, the fire was warm, the tea was brewing, and Miss Marple was content to let the world turn, ready for the next puzzle to find its way to her door.